Hi, welcome to another episode on my series Job Hunt Essentials. In today's episode, we'll be talking about resume writing. Before we talk about resume writing, it's important to understand how a resume gets used in the hiring process. Typically, for any job, there are a lot of candidates applying for it, and the resume is the first piece of information with which the candidates are pre-filtered. This is the stage where they are trying to check whether the candidate meets the minimum requirements for the job. This could be at the level of skill sets, the work experience, and so on. This level of pre-filtering is typically done by a recruiter, and sometimes there are usage of automated scripts to understand the content of the resume and help it to do some quicker pre-filtering. So this is something to keep in mind so that you make your resume easy for parsing scripts as well. And then the next phase is the shortlisting. Of course, it's still practically impossible to interview every single candidate who meets the minimum bar, right? So you'd have to do some level of shortlisting. And that's the phase where we're trying to reduce the candidate list to another shorter list of 5 to 20, depending on the company and the job type, from this list of people who meet the minimum bar. And this is the phase where your resume is really trying to tell us what makes you stand out from the rest of the candidates who already meet the minimum bar. And then the meaty part, which is the interviewing. In the interview stage, companies typically tend to check whether the content in your resume, whether you understand more about the experiences and the projects that you've had, whether how much depth you have, how much knowledge you have, and how solid control in the technical aspects you hold, as much as what you said in the resume, and whether it and how we can map it to the kind of job requirements that the company would have. So all in all, it's really trying to understand the legitimacy and the depth of the content in your resume. And finally, the verification. This is a crucial step where before sending out an offer, companies typically tend to do background verification. And your resume is the key piece of information with which they're going to verify whether the truthfulness of the information and whether the candidate has the due credentials that they claim to have. And of course, typically these are done by third-party companies or for most of the major companies. So now that we know how a resume gets used in the process, as you can see, there are different stages and different things stand out at different parts. So from that perspective, some of the key elements of the resume, the first most important thing is the skills. These could be the technical skills that are objective enough to identify to say, okay, these are the set of skills that this person claims to have, and whether this maps to the kind of skills that the job have. For example, like say you're trying to find a web developer, then whether you have JavaScript or some kind of uh, boilerplate code, whether you have that experience would be useful thing to have. And then comes the experience part. This is basically your past experience working on projects and stuff that can be useful in doing a good job in the new position that you're applying for. Typically, this would be your work experience, your internship experience. But for freshers or fresh grads who don't really have that work experience, you could also use take your research experience, your teaching experience, or your academic work experience also as a component here to demonstrate that you have had the past working culture and the experience to do a good job in the job you're applying for. And the next thing is the contribution. This is really to see how much you've really contributed to technical projects that you have worked in the past. It's pretty much usually their projects, which could come from your work-related projects. Of course, you need to make sure you're not revealing anything that might be state secret or something that's protected by NDA. And besides that, you can also showcase your research projects, your academic projects, and any side projects that can showcase your skills. And the more convincing and easily accessible the projects are, the better it helps the reader to understand the depth and how much you've worked in a particular project. And then comes the artifacts. This is something that's beyond just the projects, where you're really trying to showcase your technical control in a particular field. This could be through like publications or papers or patents that you might have, and also you may have taken like certifications. Let's say there are a lot of MOOCs out there, like online courses or like online certifications that you've taken to demonstrate a solid control in a particular area. And finally, awards and accomplishments. This is to demonstrate like how much have you know others recognize your contributions in different areas, and that really tells us like how well you stood out compared to a lot of other folks in a particular area of expertise. And this helps you to set. These are different things that help you set apart. Now, these are all the basic fundamental elements of a resume that you're pretty much gonna find. I would expect to find in most of the resumes that are like sent for job applications. But what makes a resume awesome? Uh, an element, the elements of an awesome resume would still remain the same. You'd still need to have all the skills, experience, contributions, and accomplishments in your resume. But what makes it awesome is owning the narrative. A good resume and an awesome resume owns the narrative. What do I mean by that? It means it helps me get a quick snapshot of who you are professionally. I'm able to get that just very quickly instead of me having to read through an entire resume and build a snapshot myself. And next thing is it highlights the standout elements. There may be too many standout, there may be a lot of standout elements in a good resume, but to make it awesome, you take the additional effort to make sure that you're highlighting them and showcasing why these are awesome things about you, and helps uh, put them at the forefront of your portfolio. And then finally, it emphasizes your strength. This is a slightly different variation where you're really trying to say, okay, there are some things that are standing out, but there's some things that I'm really, really good at. Let's say, for example, I'm a very good Python developer or I'm a very good C++ developer. You're emphasizing your strengths, so it's signaling the interviewer or the reader that, okay, you know what, these are the kind of things that this person claims to know really well. And so it makes it easier that when a job that has a matching requirement that comes along the way, it makes very hard to like pass over your resume for that particular job. And this is what makes a resume awesome, owning the narrative. Now remember, I'm not claiming here about like doing awesome things to put in a resume, but rather it's mostly about like how you present the content that you already have in a way that it makes your resume stand out from a lot of other resumes that just dump in all the information about the portfolio in a piece of paper. Now, just to give an example, like before that, like uh, owning a narrative is also an important part when it comes to the success of your interview. I have found it in my personal experience, and a lot of times the structure of your resume greatly influences how your interview goes. The parts that you highlight more tend to kept questioning more in your resume, and as a result, it also makes it easier for you to prepare a lot in that area. And the next thing is to advertise your professional snapshot. Now, whether you like it or not, reading through your resume, the reader is going to make a quick snapshot of who you are professionally. So, giving your advertised version of your professional snapshot makes it easier to own your narrative. If not, the person is going to like build an opinion themselves, looking at different other points, and it may or may not be the best narrative that you want, and it sometimes affects the way your interviews go as well. And again, like to emphasize, highlighting the areas that you think are your strengths is very important to convince the interviewer to like take the direction more in your strengths, so that it does not leave an open area for people to like just go shooting in the dark. Again, like highlighting does not mean that like you're not going to be questioned on other aspects of your resume, but this increases the chances of the areas where you are more comfortable fielding questions, and that gets discussed more often. And this also makes sure that you you really cannot like study everything in a particular domain, but like highlighting some specific areas knows that you're at least expected to know very well in those areas. It makes the interview prep also quite easy. So this is my resume, and I just wanted to like share a few points of the minor tweaks I made in my resume to stand out and owning the narrative. And here you can see that I added a professional snapshot section where I'm calling out myself as a software development engineer. That's the key job role that I'm like applying for. And I'm highlighting that I have a master's program in computer science with 3+ years of experience. So this helps me stand out from a lot of other candidates who have lesser work experience, or like, and this helps me to position adequately for a job, let's say for a mid-level like software engineering position. And I also call out the areas of the interest. Let's say in my case it's computer vision and AI. So that means these are the kind of job roles and the positions that I'm interested for. Giving this quick snippet helps the reader get a quick idea of who I am professionally, and so that like, it also makes sure that I'm getting calls for job profiles that are more adequately suited for my interests as well. And the next thing is how you can influence the interview. This is a snapshot of like my industry experience from one of my companies. So as you can see, like I'm highlighting like deep learning as one of the key skills areas, and I'm also like talking about like object detection, because deep learning itself is a huge area. So I'm limiting myself to object detection as the subsection. And then when it comes to computer vision, it's still a vast area for me to prepare pretty much entirely. So I am trying to highlight some key technical components like 3D reconstruction and bundle adjustment are some of the key technical areas that I'm portraying myself as an expert, so that it helps the interviewer to also understand where my expertise lies, and they tend to question more on that area, and I'm also being better prepared to field questions in these key technical areas that I'm highlighting in my resume. And again, these are just my own resume and my own like structures that I have done. So I would encourage you to think about like what are your strengths, what kind of aspects would you want to highlight in your profile to help it stand out. And also like one thing is to not just have one resume uh, and like stick to it. Like sometimes you have to keep understanding like how your interviews also go. You will, as you start giving more and more interviews, you'll understand that your structure of your resume starts influencing your interview a lot. So the more you play around with the structure and like keep highlighting the areas that you're more comfortable, you will start realizing that your interviews also go more the way you want it to. So like I think it's a more of an iterative process that you're going to keep working on as you give more and more interviews and see how people interpret your resume. And also like one thing is to get feedback from people. uh, be open to like showcasing your resume to folks who have similar job profiles, to just get an opinion of like how they view your profile and like what things that they think stand out and how you could improve it. The last thing you want is to have a few spelling errors in your resume to make it look like not something that you're very serious about. So definitely proofreading is something that you need to keep in mind. Okay, ha- just I know these are all like we're talking about very deep stuff, but just to also keep a check on the fundamentals, make sure that you're only including truthful information on your resume. Of course, like there is a lot of there is a notion of, you know what, it's okay to lie a little on your resume, but think about it. Like let's say you've done a lot of work to build a very good profile, and a few harmless lies that you might think that are thrown in your resume, if they like come out as like not so truthful things, it really affects the legitimacy of your entire resume and all the other things that you've put all your hard work to build to. So I would really think long and hard before you really uh, put anything that you think is not true. So like stick to the truthful aspects of your profile. The next thing is to be concise. No one wants to read an entire 5-6 page resume. And also like, it quickly loses interest, especially when you're trying to screen through hundreds of candidates. So be very ruthless when it comes to like editing your resume. Keep it as short as possible, and do not include any information that you don't think is going to add value to why you should be hired in a particular job. And finally, highlight the impactful areas of your resume. This could be like, what areas that you have expertise, what kind of contributions you've made. Now, these are the three basic fundamental aspects that you absolutely need to keep in mind when you're building any resume for that matter. But there are some caveats to it that you also need to keep in mind. Although I mentioned that you need to keep things very truthful, it might be okay to rephrase things to make sure you're giving enough context for the reader. A lot of projects and a lot of technologies might be too proprietary and like customized for your previous experience with a company, that might not really be very clearly evident for the reader who does not have enough background. So it might be okay to rephrase your like position of the project such that it gives better clarity on like the kind of work you've done for someone who does not have in-depth knowledge of the proprietary information. And when it comes to keeping it concise, I think general rule of thumb is for like freshers to keep it within like one site, one page for like freshers, and not more than two sites for anyone for that matter. Because I think if you're going beyond that, it's probably like I think you've already like convinced the reader to make an opinion about you in the first two pages. Anything beyond that is probably not going to add as much value for yourself. And when it comes to writing impactful parts in a resume, I think a very useful format that I found is to like have a three part approach. First part is to set the context of what you have done. What was this project about? Like what was the background? And then the next thing is the action. Like what efforts did you take in that context to make a change? And then the impact. What was the effect of the action that you took in this particular project? So say for example, in my case, to give an example, finding business closures on a Google map is an important component to keep the maps fresh. And I took an action to build an ML-based Siamese network to detect business closures using images. And the impact that I had was I was able to generate, like, say, 100,000 closures on maps, and also at a reduced cost of, like, I reduced the cost by around 128%. So that was the context, action, and impact part that you can keep in mind. And a couple of bonus tips here. When it comes to like writing resume, I like to have two parts. One is to like pour down all the content you have in one like huge working document, and then like having another like precise uh, resume where you distill down the information that you think are most useful for your resume, and then you have one final fair copy. So I think keeping that two-stage approach might be very useful so that you don't miss out on all the things you've done, and also you're not just putting everything into your resume. And then I personally prefer like using overleaf latex for like my resume editing, and I found Fang Path resume template to be quite useful in like as a very concise way of presenting my portfolio. Now we have talked about like resume writing in general, but I just want to like have a few special notes for freshers and new grads. One thing I've noticed in freshers and new grads is they tend to like pick and add like 10, like sometimes even 10 or 20 projects that they've done everything they've done into a resume. Now that's okay as long as you are confident to field a lot of questions in any of these projects. But that does not seem to be the case, and it's actually not realistic as well. So I would rather recommend to pick and choose like handful of projects, even if it's one or two, that you can speak in depth to what works you have done, like how did you come up with this work, and like what all efforts you took to like build a good job in that project. I think like showcasing the depth in knowledge is more important and more useful than like throwing out like 10 projects where none of these projects have very solid uh, grasp from your side. Uh, and also like as a fresh grad, it's okay to not having figured out everything and the get go. Not everyone does that, and it's okay. So even if you have not had, even if you have like few other items that do not directly feed into a narrative, but still demonstrate that you have put in the effort to like explore different areas, that's still a good thing. So I would still recommend like adding that as long as it fits inside your narrative. But be honest about it. It's okay to say, okay, you know what, I've tried these things, but I realize that this is where I really find my passion, and this is where I want to keep going deeper. But like, and resume building is not a one-time thing. It's going to be a continuous process throughout your professional career. So keep identifying like what are the gaps in your profile, what other things you could be doing to make your profile stand out further and more and more. So keeping the continuous work to improving your profile is always a good thing to do, both for a fresher and also for anyone in the professional career. And to re-emphasize again, like for for work experience folks, they could talk about like the industry projects, for which may have which would have a good amount of impact. But for freshers, like that might not be the case. But having said that, does not mean you shouldn't be highlighting your projects, because From a fresher perspective, what's interesting is the amount of effort and the hustling culture that you bring into the projects, right? So, highlighting the projects and the efforts you took to learn and contribute in the projects that you've taken and the efforts you've taken to gain skills are still a very valuable signal that you might want to highlight in your resume. So, to summarize, I think one important takeaway I want to give you guys from this video is to own your narrative. That's the difference. That's the difference between a good resume versus an awesome resume. Own your narrative because that helps structure and direct your interviews as well. It, and by owning a narrative, I want you to think about how you can advertise your professional snapshot, how you can work on highlighting the standout elements of your resume, and also what are your strengths and how can you emphasize your strengths more and more in your resume so it gives a clearer signal to the interviewer that where you're really strong at, and also helps you channel your energy towards interview prep on these areas that you really claim to be your strengths. I hope this video was useful for you. Thank you so much for your time. Looking forward to meeting you in another video. Thank you so much.